The late afternoon sun poured gold across Pinecrest Ridge, the land Ethan Cole's family had guarded for nearly a century. It was wild country, stitched with pines that creaked when the wind slid through them, and rock faces that glowed amber when dusk settled. To Ethan, it wasn't just property. It was inheritance, history, and promise. But now, as he stood beside the faded "for sale" sign that someone else had driven into his soil, the ridge felt foreign, like a stranger wearing a familiar face. The HOA president, Marla Denshaw, was a woman who could talk a snowstorm into sunshine. She had a realtor's smile and a senator's confidence, the kind of person who made big deals sound like moral duties. She'd approached Ethan 2 years earlier at a town meeting, her perfume cutting through the scent of sawdust and rain. "Mr. Cole," she'd said, extending a manicured hand, "you're sitting on opportunity. Pinecrest Ridge could be the next jewel of Cedar County. Families, schools, hiking trails. It's the future." Ethan had hesitated. "It's a mountain, not a suburb," he'd replied, half joking, half pleading. Marla's eyes sparkled. "Then let's build a community that respects that mountain. We'll call it Pinecrest Heights Eco. Homes, sustainable design, all that good stuff. You'll still own the ridge, technically. We're just leasing part of it for development. Think of it as a partnership." He remembered how easily that word partnership had softened him. He didn't trust corporations, but this wasn't a corporation. It was a homeowners association, a group of locals. Neighbors, people who promised to build responsibly. They said they'd bring jobs, stabilize the economy, keep the mountain intact. She'd even called it progress. And progress, in a town that had been shrinking since the mine closed, sounded noble. Now, as he looked across the ridge, the noble talk rang hollow. Bulldozers chewed through topsoil that had taken centuries to form. They scraped away the wildflowers his mother used to collect, the same ground his grandfather had once plowed with mules. The sound of steel teeth grinding against stone filled the air like a growl. Ethan stood on the edge of the construction site, his boots sinking in mud, and every vibration seemed to shake through his ribs. He called out to one of the workers, a young man in a hard hat, "You're cutting too deep on that slope." Ethan said, pointing toward a stretch where the machines had carved an unnatural terrace, "That's all shale and clay. Once it rains, it'll slide." The worker shrugged. "Talk to the boss, mister. We just follow the blueprints." The boss, of course, was Marla. When Ethan confronted her that afternoon, she was standing beside a temporary office trailer, overseeing the land as if she owned it. She turned when he approached, her expression patient but guarded. "You're excavating past the safe line," Ethan said. "There's a spring under that shelf. I told your engineers," she interrupted, still smiling. "Oh, Mr. Cole, that's why we have engineers, licensed professionals. They know what they're doing." He clenched his jaw. "Your professionals don't know this mountain. I do." Marla's smile didn't falter, but her voice cooled. "We appreciate your passion, but progress requires a little trust. We've invested too much to second. Guess every little rock and puddle. Besides, you're still getting your share of the lease income. You'll be thanking us when this place is on magazine covers." He looked past her at the ridge, now scarred with tire tracks and plastic piping. "You're carving into something that can't be put back." She laughed softly. "Mountains don't move, Ethan. They adapt." That was the last real conversation they had before the HOA took full control. Over the next months, Pinecrest Heights sprang up like weeds after rain. Trucks carried in lumber, cement, and glossy white siding. The smell of pine sap gave way to asphalt and paint. Where deer trails once crossed, driveways now curved. Marla's sales team moved fast, pitching the homes as rustic luxury with panoramic views. Buyers arrived from the city, families with electric cars and golden retrievers, eager to breathe mountain air without giving up Wi-Fi. Ethan watched from a distance. His cabin sat on a small plateau overlooking the whole mess. Every day, the noise started at dawn, hammering, drilling, the constant beeping of trucks backing up. He'd sit on his porch with coffee, trying not to hate what he saw. But hate came anyway, slow and steady, like water wearing down stone. When the first homes were finished, the HOA held a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Marla stood in front of the crowd, flanked by photographers and local officials. Ethan stayed back under the trees, arms crossed. She gestured grandly at the line of modern houses perched along the ridge. "We built these not just to live in," she said, "but to honor the beauty of Pinecrest. This is community and conservation, hand in hand." Ethan almost laughed. Behind her, a drainage ditch overflowed with muddy water from last night's rain. He could already see hairline cracks forming along the steepest driveway. The ground was shifting. He'd told them that would happen. But they'd fenced off his access, redrew the boundaries, even blocked his private road, citing shared easement adjustments. He was now a peripheral owner, on land his grandfather had bled for. He tried to fight it, hired a local attorney, but the HOA paperwork was airtight. Somewhere in the fine print of those partnership documents, he'd effectively signed away his leverage. They'd promised him royalties and profits that never came. When he asked questions, they pointed him to board meetings he wasn't invited to. By autumn, his mountain didn't feel like home anymore. He'd walk the edges, past survey stakes and erosion control nets, listening to the unnatural hum of air conditioners and the barking of dogs behind ornamental fences. He found dead fish in the creek that used to run clear. The spring he'd warned them about had been diverted into a concrete channel, choking on silt. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the far ridge, Ethan met Marla again, by accident this time. She was showing a young couple one of the new houses near his property line. The place gleamed with fresh paint and wrap-around glass windows that reflected the mountains like trophies. "Oh, Mr. Cole," she said, spotting him as if greeting an old friend. "How's the cabin life treating you?" Peaceful as ever, he looked past her at the slope. "You built those foundations right into the clay band." Her smile wavered. "Our engineers are confident in the design. Everything's up to code. Codes don't stop gravity," he said quietly. She gave a little shrug, the kind that dismissed both the warning and the man giving it. "You worry too much. We've moved heaven and earth to make this community thrive. Sometimes you have to let go of the past." He wanted to tell her that the mountain was the past, the present, and the warning of the future. But he saw the look in her eyes, impatience mixed with greed, and new words were useless. As the couple admired their dream home, Ethan turned away. The air smelled like rain, heavy and electric. Down below, he could hear the faint gurgle of the buried spring forcing its way through the ground, searching for a path it could no longer find. He paused, hand resting on the rough bark of a pine, and felt the tremor beneath his boots. So faint it could have been his imagination, but the mountain always told the truth if you listened long enough. And that night, under the whispering trees, Ethan promised himself that if the ridge ever took back what it was owed, he'd make sure the world knew exactly who was to blame. The storm had been building for days, the kind that gathered in the mountains like a living thing, slow, silent, patient. By the third night, rain came down in sheets so thick the ridgelines disappeared into mist. The pines groaned under the weight of water, and the creeks that used to trickle now roared like angry rivers. Ethan Cole hadn't slept in 30 hours. He sat by the window of his cabin, watching his mountain drown. Every instinct in him knew what was coming. He could feel it in the vibration of the earth, in the way the rain refused to let up, in the deep cracking sounds that came not from thunder but from the soil itself. The mountain wasn't built to hold what the HOA had done to it. They'd cut deep, stripped too much, caged water where it was meant to flow free. He'd told them over and over again. And now, as midnight bled into morning, the mountain began to answer. At first, it was just a sound low and distant like a giant exhaling underground. Ethan stepped outside with a flashlight, pulling his coat tight against the cold. The rain hit his face sideways, stinging his eyes. His boots sank into the muddy earth as he made his way toward the ridge. The beam of his light danced over the trees, catching flashes of silver water running where no stream should be. Then he heard it. A single, sharp crack, like a gunshot from the heart of the slope. He froze, the light in his hand trembled. A second later came another, followed by a long, shuddering rumble that rolled through the ground beneath him. He turned the light uphill just in time to see the first section of the ridge split open. The soil shivered, then began to move, not collapse all at once, but slowly, like a beast waking from centuries of sleep. "God," he whispered, "it's happening." The hill slumped forward in one fluid motion, taking with it everything that man had built. Driveways folded like ribbon. Retaining walls snapped. One of the streetlights blinked once, twice, and then vanished into a black wave of mud and roots. The rumble grew louder, heavier, until it was no longer a sound but a presence pressing against his chest. Ethan stumbled backward, slipping in the wet grass as the mountain released all it had held back. Water, rock, soil, years of pressure bursting free. He could see rooftops sliding like toys, hear the faint cries of people waking too late. The air filled with a mix of rain and dust. He wanted to run toward them to help, but there was no helping now. You couldn't fight gravity once it decided to move. He stood helpless as the mountain reclaimed what had been stolen. It took minutes, only minutes, for everything the HOA had built to vanish beneath Landslide. Then, as quickly as it began, the sound faded, replaced by the relentless hiss of rain. The ridge was gone. When dawn came, a gray silence hung over what used to be Pinecrest Heights. Rain had stopped, but fog clung to the ruined slopes. Emergency vehicles lined the road below, red and blue lights flashing weakly in the mist. Reporters swarmed, their vans parked on the shoulder. Cameras pointed at the devastation. Ethan walked down slowly, mud caked to his legs. He passed shattered tree trunks, fragments of siding, and an overturned SUV half, buried in silt. The smell of wet earth mixed with gas and broken timber. What was once a proud cul-de-sac of expensive homes now looked like a graveyard made of clay. Marla Denshaw was there, her hair matted, her designer jacket soaked and stained. She barked orders at volunteers, but her voice cracked every few words. When she saw Ethan approaching, something flickered in her eyes: rage, fear, guilt, maybe all three. She pushed past a firefighter and stormed toward him, slipping once in the mud before catching herself. "You," she spat. "You knew this would happen." Ethan stopped a few feet away. "I told you it would happen. There's a difference." She jabbed a finger at him, her voice rising. "You didn't warn us properly. You hid information. You didn't share your geological reports. We could have prevented this if you'd cooperated." He almost laughed, a hollow sound in the mist. "I begged you to stop cutting into the ridge. You called it progress. I showed you every report, every map. You said your engineers knew better." Her expression hardened. The cameras were turning toward them now, reporters sensing drama, microphones raised like vultures' beaks. Marla noticed and switched tone instantly, her voice trembling but loud enough for the cameras to hear. This man owned the land. He refused to maintain his part of the property. His negligence endangered dozens of families. Ethan let the accusation hang in the air. He could feel every lens pointed at him, every whisper among the reporters. He reached into his coat and pulled out a weatherproof folder, swollen from humidity but sealed tight. Slowly, he unzipped it and unfolded a stack of papers, their edges muddy but the words still clear. "I've been waiting for you to say that," he said quietly. Marla blinked. Thrown off balance. "What is that?" "Proof." He held up the top sheet, a dated letter with her signature at the bottom. "This is the geological survey I sent you in April of last year. It shows the instability of the slope. You dismissed it." He flipped to another page. "This one's from the county inspector. You pressured him to approve the drainage system even after it failed the water retention test. The crowd around them began to murmur. One of the reporters moved closer. Ethan handed the folder to her directly. There's more. Meeting recordings, emails, every ignored warning. Every lie you told your board to keep the project on schedule. Marla's face went pale. You can't, I can. He cut in, and I will. The reporter opened the folder, cameras zoomed in. A second. Reporter asked Marla if she wanted to comment. She stammered something about misinformation, about context, but her voice had lost all authority. Ethan stood still, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and for the first time in years he didn't feel powerless. This mountain warned you, he said, his voice calm, steady. I warned you. You built on greed, not ground. And now you want someone else to pay the price. Not this time. Behind them, a section of the slope shifted again, a small afterslide sending another wave of mud trickling down the hill. The reporters jumped back. Marla flinched. Ethan didn't move. He kept his eyes on her, watching as realization set in that the story she tried to control was now slipping away, just like the homes she'd promised were unshakable. By the end of the day, her name was trending on every news outlet in the state. The HOA was under investigation for fraud, and the county officials who'd signed off on the permits were suddenly on leave. Ethan gave one interview, just one, where he spoke quietly about responsibility, about the cost of ignoring the land. He didn't gloat, didn't rage. He simply told the truth. When the reporters left and the cleanup crews arrived, he walked the edge of what used to be the ridge. The air smelled of rain and broken roots. Beneath the silence, he could hear water moving again, freer now, threading its way back where it belonged. He crouched and pressed his palm to the wet earth. The ground was cold but alive, breathing again. You did what you had to, he murmured. Now rest. In the valley below, HOA ruins glistened under the weak sun. The mountain had taken back what was stolen, and Ethan Cole, the man they'd called bitter and backward, was the only one left standing, because he'd never tried to own the mountain. He'd only ever listened to it.